Tonight on Free Minds TV, we'll be discussing one small town in Maine that has declared its sovereignty, at least when it comes to food. We'll also be discussing the nation's energy supply, the ongoing conflict in Libya, and QE2. That plus more coming up tonight on Free Minds TV.
Episode 198 of Free Minds TV, where we challenge you, the viewer, to think outside the box. It's still Toby here with you.
And Nick.
Coming close on the 200th anniversary of our episodes.
Not the 200th anniversary. We haven't done this for 2 centuries.
I feel like we have.
But
We've been on the air
for... The 200 episode mark.
We've been on the air for 5 years. The 5th anniversary, I guess, is what we'd be coming up on. Really, just 200 episodes. So that's a
lot of
milestone,
episodes,
right? Plus all the radio shows and some bonus ones out there. So it's coming right up. We do have a lot to get into tonight. We are going to be discussing sovereignty, at least when it comes to food. I think that this is very important. We're also going to be, of course, I think it's important to continue discussing the third war that we're in Libya. It's still going on. I think
not going as well as some people had hoped.
We'll be discussing that as well.
So it's more like weeks, not days, at the very least now.
As Nick has an exciting story about QE2.
Toby finds economics boring.
Yeah, it's just the name, QE2. It doesn't really explain much, but Nick says
I'll explain it.
It's going to make it into something good that we can all enjoy. And also the oil thing, energy needs. So a lot of stuff to get into. But I wanted to start off, Nick, by talking about something that I find extremely important. Probably one of the most important things we could talk about on the show or have policy around, and that's food. And I think that this is an excellent place where we don't need more policy, we need less.
Well, that's the way we feel about just about everything, though.
Of course. But I think that when you're talking about really vitally important things, you don't want a government in there screwing it all up, because governments by nature are slow.
And those are usually the first things they jump in and screw up. Energy, food, education, a lot of the really healthcare, a lot of the really basic, really vital things. That's where they jump in. And they screw up the hardest.
Right, and there's a lot of stuff been going on state and on the federal level as well to get the government involved in food. I know we've talked about Senate bill, I think it's, 510 or something, doesn't matter. The point of the bill is to pretty much outlaw small farms, anyone who wants to grow their own food or buy local food that doesn't get the approval sticker from the government that costs many, many thousands and even hundreds of thousands of dollars in some cases. Essentially what the bill is designed to do over the next 10 years or so is eliminate small farms, make all food come from corporations. There's been a number of bills that have been coming out on the state levels as well that do similar things. And of course, this is all in the name of food safety. We need to do this, the government says, because what if a bad batch of lettuce comes out? How will we know where it came from? We need the people who sell the lettuce to have this sophisticated system where they know exactly which plant it came from.
Well, yeah, and that's especially important when you consider that lettuce has been so dangerous for years and years and years.
Well,
we've been getting food from small farms in some parts of the country. Granted, they've seen a big decline since their peak, but in many parts of the country, you've had a continual ability to get food from small farms since the area was settled by Europeans. So you're talking about, for hundreds of years, it's been okay for people to either raise their own food or buy food from their... Hundreds of years here in North America.
Man has been getting along ever since we started cultivating the vegetables and slaughtering our livestock. We've been getting along without corporations and having to ID everything and get stamps of approval on everything, and it's gone okay. The reason why the government's gotten their foot in the door, though, is because anytime there is a radish scare or a lettuce scare or anything else that gets a few people sick, and yes, even does sometimes even kill a few people, well, that's something huge to point at. And so we must need this sweeping legislation that's going to fundamentally change the way we grow and eat our food, what we can eat for food. I don't want to get all hippy-dippy on you guys, but I think that there is a lot of very valid arguments to be made that local, fresh food is much more healthy than a lot of food that's grown on these huge corporate farms or shipped in with all sorts of who knows what kind of pesticide or even some of the genetically modified food. I'm not completely going against that. Like I said, I don't want to get too hippy-dippy on you, but I think there are a lot of arguments to be made that local food is healthier, and at the very least, people should be able to decide.
Yeah, people. Well, I mean, if you're not free, to produce your own food or to decide where you're going to buy, from where you're going to buy your food, like from your neighbor who might be a farmer, then you really are only one step away from not having the freedom to eat.
Right.
I mean, this is basically giving
the government will
giving the government control of the food supply seems very dangerous to me. And as you're pointing out, Toby, I don't think you need to get into the hippie arguments for local food. I mean, you can argue local is not necessarily organic, but what you do definitely get with a more localized food supply is less dependence on the supply chain, which is good in times of natural disaster, because if you're relying on your produce to come from somewhere like California, when it could just as easily be grown somewhere like New Hampshire or Vermont, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Whether if there's a natural disaster, civil unrest, peak oil, or just a temporary oil shortage, a lot of the cost of that food getting to you is going to be the transportation costs, the oil costs.
And we are going to be talking about our dependence on oil and alternative energies, and I think that's an excellent point. How much of the cost of food is because we have to ship it from another country, drive it across the country, put it on a train and have it go 2,000 miles before it reaches its destination.
There's nothing wrong with eating that way with some things. Obviously, you know, we're living in New England.
Can't grow coffee here.
Can't grow anything fresh in the winter, really.
Sure.
I mean, so if you want cucumbers, they're going to come. Actually, a lot of our cucumbers come from Canada. They grow them in big greenhouses up there. But you're going to get it from somewhere else.
Sure.
Because there are just some things that can't be grown here. Coffee, as you pointed out, bananas. Not going to be growing bananas.
Right. But there's a lot of food, Nick, that we could be growing here. So I think there are many arguments. But that's not even what we need to focus on. What we continuously focus on coming back to principles a lot of the time. Try to do it as much as possible. But coming back to the principles of you're a free person. You don't need other people telling you who you can do business with, what foods you can put into your body. Why, in a free country, should the government be telling you what you can eat and who you can buy it from? And I think that there are a myriad of other arguments that we could be made on why having just corporate farms supply food. There's a myriad of those arguments. We could go on forever, but let's just bring it back to the freedom argument. Do we need the government telling us what food we can buy and what food we can't buy, what we can put into our bodies? I say absolutely not. Any government that's going to tell you that you can't buy the milk from the farmer down the street, or you can't grow your own carrots,
or you can't sell the milk if you're the farmer.
Sure. I mean, it is completely asinine policy. And thus far, what has the American public said about this bill?
Not much. I mean, it's just...
I haven't even heard a larger media source report on it.
No, there's been some grumbling in the local food movement. There's been some grumbling among small farmers, and there should be. Because
I've read articles.
It's a very fundamental freedom to say, you can grow your own food. You can raise chickens and sell eggs to your neighbors. I mean, that's fundamental. Serfs in Russia never would have asked permission or expected, you know, they had to give a certain amount of their produce as taxes to the Tsar. Same with serfs in other parts of Europe, when they still had serfdom. But they were much freer in the respect that if they wanted to farm, they didn't need permission to put up new structures. They didn't need building permits. They didn't need to get their farm inspected. They didn't need to get all of these licenses and permits and pay all of the fees associated with them. There weren't special fees because you were producing food. Sure. And that's what we're dealing with today.
Right, and there's a lot of different ways that they're going to be doing this, but one example is the reason why this really benefits corporations. Say you are selling chickens, for example. A big corporation like Tyson Chicken will have a factory full of thousands, if not millions of chickens that all just get to pay for this government stamp of approval and have the barcodes. They only have to pay once. Meanwhile, you've got the local farmer who might have a few different chickens. They weren't all hatched from the same litter. They have to have a separate stamp for every single one of those chickens. Each stamp costs more than the chicken is worth.
Well, that's coming down the road. I mean, the National Animal ID system is not yet in place.
One of the many bills that's coming down. I mean, like I said, this isn't just one bill that the governments on the state and federal level are clamping down and taking control of the food supply. This is just one example of a bill that's coming down.
And NAIS was really that would have crushed
every
hobby farmers and the really small operations.
They're going for it because corporate the corporations out there, the ones who control the government, are pushing these bills along. Monsanto's of the world, they are out there, Nick, and they are controlling the government. They have the power.
Well, plus you've got
they have the lobbying power.
You've got the do-gooder elements within government that just want the control too.
Sure. Well, the ones who go, well, we want all people to be safe. We want to know where the chicken came from, which egg it was hatched from. We not want to know its a whole lineage in case we need a recall. So we need this, and that's the good do-gooder aspect. And then you've got the corporations who go, well, this is a perfect opportunity for us to put all small farmers out of business, take complete control of the food system, and it's sick. It's absolutely sick. And I mean, what we talk about, what goes on in this country, well, it just gives us less choice, put some small farmers out of business. What's this do in other countries? It kills, I guess it's difficult to put a number on it, but the Monsantos of the world are actually killing and starving to death thousands and thousands of farmers and people all over the world with their policy. I'm getting on a tangent. I guess we should stick to what's going on here, because this is coming from an article from Maine, where a local town in Maine, the town of Sedgwick, Maine, has declared food sovereignty. Now, what does that mean? Maine has done what no other town in the United States has done. The town unanimously passed an ordinance giving the citizens the right to, quote, produce, process, sell, purchase, and consume local foods of their choosing. Doesn't it seem insane that Maine is the only town in the United States where its citizens have the right to, quote, produce, process, sell, purchase, and consume local foods of their choosing? No other town but Sedgwick, Maine. Of course, if you ask the state of Maine or the federal government, they still don't have the right. But that just boggles my mind, Nick. Mm-hmm. That in every town except Sedgwick, you don't have the right to...
Not without the right paperwork and jumping through the right hoops. I mean, in many places you'll be left alone to grow your own food, but as soon as you're dealing with distributing, even if you're just sharing it with other people, then you could possibly have to deal with.
Sure, not everybody's going to get arrested, but the fact that you're breaking the law is absolutely crazy. The bill goes on to, let's get this. This is really insane. The bill goes on to say, it shall be unlawful for any law or regulation adopted by the state or federal government to interfere with the rights recognized by this ordinance, and, quote, patrons purchasing food for home consumption may enter into private agreements with those producers or processors of local foods and waive any liability for the consumption of that food.
That's amazing.
People can actually go, and I could say, Nick, would you like to buy this egg? My chicken laid it. And you could go, yes. And I could go, okay, if it has salmonella, I warned you. Can you believe people could actually do that?
Yeah, it's mind-blowing to think that you could just allow people to enter into private contracts with fair disclosure. I mean, with the disclosure requirement in place, people, basically, or the agreement to waive liability, you're basically dealing with whether adults are big people and free people and can decide where they want to get their food from. And I would argue that you are a lot better off in many cases. I'm sure there are people with nasty operations out there who don't have the best farming practices.
Yeah.
But by and large,
so do big slaughterhouses.
Yeah, by and large, I think you're a lot better off getting your food from a local farm, or at least a small enough farm where you might know someone who's working there and have some idea of their operations. Not that all of these big warehouse farming operations are bad, but especially when you're dealing with like eggs and meat and poultry, outside vegetables too, but largely with the animals. I mean, if you see the conditions some of those animals are raised in, I don't see how you could possibly think you're getting anything safer.
Sure, and all the hormones they have to throw in. I mean, they're just giving them antibiotics because otherwise, if you have them in that kind of a herd, they're going to get disease. So you have them all pumped up full of hormones and antibiotics and stuff. And that, of course, comes down to us.
Right. I'm not sure how much impact the hormones and the antibiotics actually have in the end.
Sure, that's another hippy-dippy argument, but it's something to be thought of.
The animals are raised under poor conditions, and you're giving money to a large corporation. Not that there's anything wrong with that. They've got the pricing power, but it certainly is more expensive to buy things like that local. But wouldn't you rather get your corn or meat or something from a local supplier? Right. People in the middle class as opposed to just some publicly traded corporation that really has no allegiance to anybody?
Sure. Not only that, but Nick, but the argument is made that, well, people won't know what they're buying if they're buying from the local farmer. What if they don't know that there are risks with that
Carrot's
food?
a carrot.
Well, yeah. Not only that, but guess what? Local food often does cost a little bit more because you don't have this giant corporation with a warehouse full of chickens. So guess what? Eggs are going to cost about $1 more a dozen typically when you buy them from a local farmer. So most people who are buying this local stuff, the vast majority are buying it from the big corporations. So the people who do want to buy it from the little guy, from the local farmer, they know what they're getting into. So the argument that they don't know the liability there is just complete fallacy. But anyways, I gotta say, tip of the hat to Maine. This is not very difficult to do.
Cedric, Maine. It's one tiny town.
Cedric,
in Maine.
Maine. That's true. They are standing up against the federal government and the state of Maine. So good for them. What it shows is that it doesn't take very many people to actually say, no, enough with all the people at the top who create this law. There's not enough of them to really enforce the law. If you think about it, Nick, there are an insane...
There's not that many USDA inspectors.
No, there are it's so few people in government that create the policy that govern the rest of us and force us to do certain things. And when you think about this whole system of power and privilege and who is able to set the policies and create the laws and enforce them on the vast majority, it boggles my mind how such a small minority of people can control millions and millions of others. How is that possible? Human nature is very strange. You know, in Nazi Germany, in some of the concentration camps there, to control a prison camp of about 100,000 prisoners, how many guards do you think that took? How many Nazi Germans on the guard towers threatening to kill anyone who revolted? How many of them do you think it took to control about 100,000 of them?
One would expect that it would take a lot, but I'm guessing not very many.
Yeah, it's about 100. A little over 100 people to control over 100,000 prisoners. Because I'm not trying to...
It wouldn't take that many people to actually do something about that.
No, not at all. And I'm absolutely not trying to say the people in the concentration camps should have risen up and done something. That would have been nice. But the point I'm trying to make is to illustrate how humans easily let themselves be controlled by a small minority of people, oftentimes doing very bad things. And that's what the federal government and local governments are oftentimes doing, creating bad policy that hurt the individual. They are the minority that is hurting the majority, yet they are still in control because most people do absolutely nothing. I haven't heard a lot of people talking about this stuff, yet it's going right on through. And in 10 years, will you be able to grow your own food? Will you be able to go down the street and buy food from the farmer? Or will he even be still be in business? I don't know. Let's hope that he will be, or she will be, because let's hope that the majority stands up against that piddly little minority that's controlling the rest of us. All right, we've taken up a lot of time on this segment, Nick. We do have other things to talk about. Kind of toes right into it with the federal government, but let's talk a little bit about our dependence on foreign oil and possibly goodish news.
Well,
I don't know.
No, see, it's good rhetoric, I guess, but since we just talked about how we really think, in most cases, just about all of them, the best government policy is to not have a government policy and leave it up to the marketplace, it's not really good news. President Obama gave his big speech today, not the big speech a couple days ago. This is Wednesday. That was awful, by the way, his explanation of the situation in Libya. Just not a good speech.
We'll get into that.
We'll get into that. But I digress. He gave another speech talking about how it's going to be his goal to see the U.S. reduce its importation of foreign oil by 1/3 over the next 10 years.
Oh, that's a whopping lot of...
Well, it sounds kind of ambitious, but you're only cutting the imported oil by 1/3.
That really won't change much.
It would change something. I mean, basically he's talking about incentivizing drilling and exploration here in the U.S. But I say that's not the best approach, because we've seen what happens when the government gets involved with energy before. Back in the Carter era, they were supporting the use of solar panels, which have gotten a little bit better. They still don't make a whole lot of sense yet. But at the time, back in the 1970s, it made absolutely no sense to try to get energy from solar panels. It was a nice feeling sort of a thing. It wasn't particularly green. It wasn't particularly efficient. We've seen what happened with ethanol, Toby. One of the next, there have been some steps in between, but one of the next big interventions, one of the next bright idea coming out of Washington, D.C. about energy. Well, yeah, we'll get our fuel, some of our fuel for our auto fleet, from corn, which is much of the world's food. And we've seen the subsidies going towards the production of ethanol, which really doesn't make a whole lot of sense as a fuel, in my opinion, and relies on the use of corn, a staple food crop. We've seen that lead to rising food prices and in part contribute to food price rises around the world, which have caused people to go hungry. And in some cases, not here in the U.S. so much, but in developing countries where the effect that U.S. subsidies have on the world market drives up the price of corn, contributes to people dying.
Yeah.
Those are the two bright ideas we've seen.
Yeah, not only that, but I mean, ethanol is not efficient. It takes almost, I've read it, we've commentated, I guess, on a lot of articles that show that it takes more fuel to create the ethanol than you're actually getting in the end.
If we really wanted to see what the best form of energy was in the U.S., the best thing to do would be to get the government out of the business of trying to manipulate the energy market and let the market decide.
How much is oil really worth? Should companies be exploring alternative energy sources?
Is natural gas a better idea than oil?
We can't know. The government is holding up certain corporations and giving them money to invest in oil drilling or something. We'll never know where the real demand is. And we'll never know how much oil is really worth.
They're offering tax credits and things like that. I mean, they're offering tax credits for people to put up, wind turbines, solar panels. There's all kinds of tax credits you get. They don't necessarily make a whole lot of sense. A lot of the solutions that are subsidized by the federal government are not long-term solutions. They're not bringing us any closer to getting off of oil in the long run. And I think you're far better off getting the government out of the business of energy entirely, allowing the prices of energy to rise, which President Obama says is a bad thing.
Oh, it's not bad. It would cause me to shut off my lights, Nick. It would cause me to shut off my TV at night. It would cause me to reduce my energy consumption.
Right.
I could cut my energy consumption in half easily, Nick. No problem whatsoever. You know why I don't? Because it's cheap. What's my motivation to cut my energy usage down?
Right.
Why?
And you get beyond incentivizing people to conserve more and be more prudent in the way that they use energy, it would also, if prices do rise, and we've certainly seen that with oil, and I think going forward, oil is going to be a lot more expensive. Here in the U.S., we're used to very, very cheap oil. Our whole nation's built around it. It's still relatively cheap, but I think it's going to keep going up, and I don't think $5 a gallon gasoline is going to be an odd thing. I don't even know if it'll take 5 years. It might be by the end of this summer, some people are saying. So with $5 or $6 a gallon gasoline, oh yeah, you'll see a lot more efficiency in motor vehicles. You'll see a lot more research into things like natural gas. And you'll probably see things like considerations about going back to more rail transportation for moving goods. Yeah. These are things that the market will do if we allow the prices of energy to rise instead of trying to subsidize cheap energy.
Yeah, kick the can down the road and see how much more we can get.
Can't and the government's trying to make it so we have it both ways. Keep energy cheap, but get us to change. It doesn't work that way. Just let market
people are motivated. They're motivated to make profit. And the next guy who comes up with the next oil, or a corporation, they're set. They've got it all. So I mean, we don't need the government to get involved. They're only perpetuating the problem. And I know stuff like solar power subsidization. I can't talk today. Sounds very fuzzy and warm, and it's nice. Yeah, but is it really effective? Is it going to get us off of foreign oil? No. What's going to do that? Getting the government the hell out. All right, Nick, let's get into it. We got to keep bringing it up because we're still at war. Obama is the only president, Nick, who's been in 3 separate wars. Is that true? I believe that's true. I just made that up. Have there been another president that has been presiding over 3 separate wars?
I guess you could call Iraq kind of done.
We're there, Nick. We have thousands of troops.
We're still in Korea, but we wouldn't say we're still.
No, but we have thousands and thousands of people are still dying in Iraq.
People die occasionally in Korea.
Oh,
too.
yeah, but that's because they fall under a truck or something. People are getting shot still in Iraq. Okay. Anyways,
here and there, but largely combat operations have ended in Iraq. But yeah, it's true. I mean, he's presided over.
There are thousands of troops in Iraq. How can you? We're not out of Iraq.
There's thousands of troops in Germany.
Are there really thousands? Yeah. I figured they had a small
There's
airport.
There's like 40 or 50,000 in Japan.
Why?
We sent them all, huh? Because that's where it's because they're by China.
Man,
They're by China. No,
I just figured they had a little base with a couple guys.
No, most of our military's overseas, man.
Oh, good.
Yeah,
Anyway.
good. I'm glad they're over there and not over here, because I'm glad they're defending Japan and not the United States.
To be perfectly honest, I'd rather a lot of those people who join the military not be on American streets.
I would, yeah, well, the incentive to use the military if you've got it kicking around the home. I mean, I'd rather the military be far smaller than it is today.
Oh, yeah.
I'm not a big fan of standing militaries during peacetime. What do you need them for?
I can't believe there's that many people in Japan.
The whole purpose of the military is to kill people and break things. That's the whole purpose. What do you need them for in peacetime?
Well, anyways, the point I was going to say is we're still there and that it's upsetting. We're out of time to talk about that, but we are going to bring it up. Continue to bring it up. You Democrats out there who wanted change,
and the rebels are getting whooped, by the way. Yeah. It's happening. So, I mean, it keeps changing every couple of days, but
the airstrike is no longer. It's not just defending the airspace and making sure that the civilians aren't being bombed.
Which I said last week, but it's clear that I was right.
Yeah, and it's not going to end immediately, so that sucks.
And there's talk about directly arming the rebels, too, coming out just from the U.S., but from France and some other NATO powers. So that's great. I guess we're not trying to change a regime when we arm a rebel faction. First, we bomb Gaddafi's, well, we didn't, but the U.S. government bombs
with my tax dollars, so it's kind of me, too.
Bombs Gaddafi's tanks and artillery, and then the rebels still aren't organized or well-equipped enough to displace Gaddafi, so now we're just going to directly arm them. And this is not an intervention with the end game of trying to get rid of Gaddafi. How?
Of course.
If someone can explain that to me, please do so.
What if, even if it is, what if they just say, yeah, well, yeah, that's what we're doing. Come out and be honest about it. Well, at least, I mean, that's no better. Sickening. Anyways, hopefully people are waking up that it's not the change, but it doesn't matter. That's why we say federal government all done. Get rid of the federal government.
I bet next week things will still be happening in Libya. Even if Gaddafi's gone, I bet U.S. forces will still be sitting on ships in the Mediterranean, either flying over Libya or, God knows, maybe on the ground or bringing supplies in, even if Gaddafi's gone.
Sometimes I feel like an idiot because I go, I hope those people who voted for Obama realize that he was an idiot and he's just a warlord too who likes to preside and fight other people in foreign countries and intervene. And then I go, well, what are we expecting them to vote for a Republican next time who does the same thing? What we really need to be saying is, look at what the federal government is doing yet again. All right, Nick, you have about 45 seconds. What is QE2?
QE2 is
I'm glad I left you with 40 seconds.
Quantitative easing is when a central bank pumps money into the system. I like how you kept it short. Which basically they're doing through the form of buying up U.S. Treasury bonds. That's going to end in June, and I'm sure we'll be talking about it more in the coming weeks.
I can't wait.
There's a lot of concern about what happens when the Fed pulls out this support.
And I will try to rant and rave and make it less boring because, you know, my eyes are already glossing, and it was only, what, 20 seconds?
I didn't even get into bond yields.
Monetary policy. Well, I hope we've stirred the pot for a lot of you and angered you and made you think a little bit. Until next week, join us at freemindsmedia.org or freemindstv.com. It's been Toby here with you.
And Nick.
Have an excellent night and a good weekend or whatever, whenever you're watching this show. I guess it could be at any time, Nick. Anyways, take it easy.